And last month, in January, to launch the whole year, we had Shantikara coming in, and that was on the broad theme of Buddhism for today and tomorrow, which was looking at a poem by Sangharakshita, who's the founder of the Triratna community, which is this sort of Buddhism, detailing 4 gifts that Buddhism can provide for people. And this month we're going to be looking at the first of those 4 gifts. In fact, we will be doing it for more than 1 month. And that one is the lotus flower. So the shrine, we put as many lotuses as we can on the shrine, although maybe they are not authentic lotuses. And if you've got a lot of botanical knowledge, you might look at them and say, what is not quite right about those? But this one is a genuine lotus with that huge calyx in the middle. So what does it represent? It's a big symbol. Possibly the biggest symbol in Buddhism is the lotus flower. You'll see it everywhere. Now, the large Buddha image that we have on the shrine all the time, which was produced by a Western sculptor, is unusual in one particular respect. Can anyone think, well, there may be more than one, but there's one in particular I'm thinking of. Can anyone think of what is unusual about this Buddha statue?
I'll take a risk.
Yeah?
European looking?
Well, that's true, yeah, but then that's normal though, because normally you'll find whatever country you go to, the sculptors will make the Buddha statue look sort of local in a way, you know, so Chinese ones look Chinese and so on. So it's not that. Anything else? Any other thoughts? You could compare the 2 statues, and there is a difference. There are probably several differences, but there's a very large difference between the 2.
Hairstyle?
Sorry?
Hairstyle?
No, not hairstyle. No. Well, these are all good answers. I'm sure they're true, but I'll tell you what I was thinking of. Usually, Buddha statues sit on a lotus. So if you look at the small one underneath on the shrine, you'll see that it is sitting on a lotus. So, yeah, let's look at the next one. Yeah. So here's a Chinese example, quite a massive lotus. Sometimes they call it the lotus throne or the lotus seat. Padmasana is the name for it. And not only are images of the Buddha and other great enlightened figures usually sitting on lotuses, but in paintings, the lotus is usually up in the sky as well, as if it's sort of separated off from the dust and the smog of the ordinary world. So the lotus blossom, the real lotus blossom, is absolutely pristine as it opens. Its purity, its beauty, there's the symmetry of the petals, it's soft and delicate. It has all these associations, the lotus blossom. And one thing about it, just both the leaves and the petals of the lotus, is that they are, I think the word is hydrophobic, which means that water tends to collect in little droplets on it and run off, leaving the petals and the leaves apparently dry and rather waxy looking. So we have the sense then of the Buddha sitting on a lotus as being maybe rather aloof, rather separated from the ordinary world, transcendental, immune from suffering because he's transcended all the afflictive mental states, which is the tradition about the Buddha. And this is even true with the baby Buddha. Don't know if you can see that, but that is a traditional Thai image of the baby Buddha, the Buddha at the time of his birth. And it shows a legend of what happened when he was born. So although he was only a tiny baby, the legend says that he immediately stood up, promised to become enlightened, and then took 7 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there you go. Took 7 steps, and under each step there bloomed a lotus blossom. And this is even more meaningful than the Buddha sitting on a lotus, because after all, a Buddha is an enlightened person. So there is a sense in which he or she does transcend the world. But the baby Buddha was not yet enlightened. So what is going on? Now, in fact, this legend doesn't appear, as far as I'm aware, in early Buddhism. It's not there in original Buddhism. And it seemed to come around later when people more and more had sort of replaced the human historical Buddha with a transcendent Buddha, a mythic, timeless Buddha, representing the possibility of enlightenment that's always there, everywhere, for everybody, and outside time. So Sangharakshita describes this legendary Buddha who is already there out sort of when he's born, being in truth not the product of this world, but the eruption into it of transcendental reality in the form of an eternally enlightened personality. So one of the great Buddhist texts is the Lotus Sutra, and its theme in a way is introducing that sense of the eternal Buddha. I won't go into detail, it's very fascinating the way it does that. But it's clearly, in a way, an innovation in Buddhism, bringing in that idea. And also, in the Pure Land Buddhism of East Asia, they talk of a sort of a halfway house to enlightenment, which is called the Happy Land, Sukhavati. Sukhavati means the Happy Land. And this is a place, I'll show you some lotuses in the Happy Land. Yeah. It's a place crammed full of all sorts of lotuses. So anyone who's enlightened or even well on the way to enlightenment in Sukhavati is constantly zooming around on lotuses, rather like driverless cabs. But there are also a lot of big lotuses which are in bud in Sukhavati. And you get these very elaborate pictures in Chinese Buddhism showing Sukhavati. We're including all sorts of things like a disco going on in the front, for example, and this little tiny figure gazing with their back to you, gazing up, which represents you in the middle of Sukhavati. So the large Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra describes this in detail, and it's some people, it's said, see Sukhavati as a sort of a heaven that you go to in a future life, but symbolically that's not what it represents. Symbolically, it represents higher states of consciousness in this life. And the suggestion is that if you've not cultivated insight, wisdom, but you've just got into deep meditation absorptions, it's as if you're encased in the soft petals of a flower. You're inside a lotus bud. And until your faculties open, there you stay, until eventually the flower slowly opens. And you can then benefit from the teachings of the Buddha in Sukhavati, and you can practice the Dharma fully. So that's quite an interesting symbol image, isn't it? There's somebody emerging from a lotus in Sukhavati. There's a wonderful book on Pure Land Buddhism by Ratnaprabha and Shraddhadeepa of our order, and they say that the closed lotus is, and I quote, "my sheath of selfhood, which safeguards me, or so I believe, but at the same time effectively inhibits real spiritual growth. Imagining that lotus gradually opening brings a wonderful sense of expansion, openness and freedom, a natural and effortless release from the limiting confines of selfhood." So that's the symbol in the Happy Land, in Sukhavati. In fact, there's the quote. So that's a really interesting image, isn't it, I think? As if even when things are going really well, we may have rather shut ourselves up in a sort of cocoon or a lovely thick duvet. And this can even happen in meditation, if all we go for is just being in a nice state of mind. And if so, we never face up to the reality of all the suffering around us, and we haven't tried to see the significance of life through insight. I will say a little bit more about insight later on. So we have the enlightened person, untouched, unsullied by the world, as they sit on a lotus blossom. However, it seems to me that any real person has to make a journey, has to follow a path to get to the point of rising above the world. We can't just pretend we've risen above the world. And is being above the world a helpful way to look at things anyway? It seems to make enlightenment rather distant, rather separate, and rather otherworldly. Now, Green Tara here is a female Buddha who represents the refusal to disengage from the world. She represents active compassion. So there is a way in which, again, this statue is different from other Buddha statues. There are many ways, of course. For example, she's green. Most Buddhas aren't green. But there is one particular way. Can you see what that is? What is unusual about this one? If you know about Green Tara, you probably know this straight away. Yeah?
I don't know. I don't know Green Tara, but isn't she stepping out?
She is stepping out. That's what I meant, yeah. So in other words, she's not just deep in meditation like the Buddha images on the shrine here are. She's actually stepping out. And this is very, very significant. Stepping down from the lotus. Although she does have a little miniature lotus under the foot as it comes down. So the lotus represents transcendence, but early on in Buddhism, there was a much more popular and much more significant story about lotuses. And this is going to be my main theme for this talk. So, what is a real lotus like? Now, the lotus doesn't grow wild in Europe. So if you've ever seen living lotuses, it won't have been in one of the ponds on Hampstead Heath or something like that. It's a tropical plant. It needs warmth, and of course it also needs water. It is a water plant. Now, the flowers look very like water lily flowers. Does anyone know? Again, here's another. Sorry, all these questions. I'm quizzing you all the time. But what is the difference between a water lily, as you might see on a pond or a lake in Britain, and a lotus? And again, there may be many, but there's one in particular I'm thinking of. And maybe this gives you a clue.
They grow in groups.
They grow in groups, but so do water lilies.
Is it that, I'm just guessing, but is it that they're connected all the way down?
They are connected all the way down, although water lilies usually also go down into the mud. They're not just floating. So there's another thing about something about the flowers. Yeah.
Does it like extend above water?
Exactly, yeah. So the water lilies float on the water normally, while lotuses always rise above the water. So you can see the long stem of the lotus coming up above the water. Stands proud. So you get, if you want to see lotuses, by the way, you go to Kew Gardens, where they have some fabulous blue lotuses. There are a number of different species of lotus. The Utpala is the blue lotus. The pink lotus is called the Padma. The white lotus is called the Pundarika. And there's also a red lotus called the Kamala. So these are all the Sanskrit words for them. So you can see, and they are different species, although closely related. But the blue lotus is particularly beautiful. I think it has these spiky petals. And you can see them in Kew Gardens with other kinds of lotus as well. But they're always in glass houses. So if you ever go to a place that has a glass house with water in it, look out for lotuses. With any luck, they'll have some. Now, what people in India noticed is that lotuses will grow in smelly, muddy pools. Even sometimes they'll grow on damp rubbish dumps. And out of that dirt and ooze, a shoot will emerge into the water, and then it'll rise right through the water, and then it'll grow above the water, leaving the leaves floating on the surface until above the water a flower slowly opens, reaching up into the sunlight. So you can see why it was such an attractive image. I mean, partly it's such an incredibly beautiful flower anyway. So I couldn't find a good image that shows the whole of the lotus, but here is what it looks like from underneath, with the stems and the leaves floating on the surface of the water. Now, very soon after the Buddha gained enlightenment, he had a vision of humanity, and this was a complete turning point for his life, but also for the possibility of Buddhism emerging as a tradition, he knew that his enlightenment was a very personal insight. As you'll know, if you've got insights and realization in meditation, it's something that is even very difficult to describe, and it's not something you can pass on to somebody else. And this realization had come through his practice. It wasn't an intellectual discovery. It wasn't a psychological understanding that could be put into words. But his vision, the vision I'm going to describe, had helped him to decide, or even caused him to decide, that it was possible to help people towards enlightenment, even though you couldn't just teach it to them as a sort of a piece of information. And he had doubted that at first. And the account says that Brahma, who at the time was the most popular of all the Indian pre-Buddhist gods, turns up when the Buddha gains enlightenment to entreat him to teach. And the Buddha brought the diversity of people to his mind. Yeah, there's some in bud on the way up. And that's the image. So this is what he saw, that every person was like one of these lotuses. Some of them were still deep in the ooze at the bottom of the lake. Some of them were growing up through the water. Some had reached the surface of the water. And some of them were already buds. I'll go back to that nice image of lotus buds. Some people were already buds, just ready, just needing the right kind of sunshine to open up. And that opening process represented the deep spiritual realization that's open to everybody, which the Buddha called awakening, and we call enlightenment. And I just give you a quote of one of the old texts. This is from the Vinaya, that describes this, which is here. So then the Buddha looked, full of compassion towards sentient beings, with his all-perceiving eye of a Buddha. He saw beings whose mental eyes were darkened by scarcely any dust, and beings whose eyes were covered with much dust, beings sharp of senses and blunt of senses, of good disposition and bad disposition, easy to instruct and difficult to instruct, some of them seeing the dangers of unskillfulness. As in, and this is where the image comes in, as in a pond of blue lotuses or pink lotuses or white lotuses, some were born in the water, grow up in the water, but do not emerge over the water, but thrive hidden under the water. But others reach the surface of the water, and others still stand emerging out of the water, and the water doesn't touch them. Thus the Buddha addressed Brahma in the following stanza. Wide opened is the door of the deathless to all who have ears to hear. Let them release their faith. The Dharma, sweet and good. At first I did not teach to humanity, Brahma, despairing of that weary task. So he's changed his mind, basically. He thinks, let's give it a go. And that's why Buddhism, because otherwise he was enlightened. He was perfectly happy. He could just sit there and enjoy life in a way as an enlightened person. But it's as if the compassion at first needed a bit of time to emerge. And this symbol, or the image of Brahma appearing, but also the image of seeing the lake of lotuses, represents that compassion, that recognition of people's potential. So the pristine lotus rising clear of the water represents the goal of enlightenment. It has, and this is a quote from Vasantra's beautiful book, Meeting the Buddhas, it's gone beyond the mud of the world. It's risen above even the gentle waters of mundane positive mental states, and now it basks in the sunlight of reality. But even more important, as we've said, than that image of the lotus as representing awakening or enlightenment, is the image of the lotus representing the stages of growth. And that potential for growth in the lotus is already contained, as we know, in the seed as it first sprouts. even as the potential for enlightenment is already said to be there within everybody. And you have this very optimistic Buddhist image of the Buddha nature that everybody has. So rather than saying that we're all sinful and we need rescuing, you have the sense that it's more that we've covered over our innate enlightenment. It's there, deep there. And maybe it'll take a long time to uncover it. Maybe it'll take a long time to go through that growing process. But yet it's already there in the same way as the lotus flower is already in the seed. And so this is White Tara, another female Buddha. We saw Green Tara earlier, but White Tara is a bit different. I'm not going to go into all the symbolism of her, but what you will see with White Tara is lotuses. She holds a lotus stem here, and then it blossoms near her shoulder, and normally there is one in bud, there's one half open, and there's one lotus fully open. So usually that's what you'll see with Tara. I've got another image here, a statue of Green Tara. It's a little bit difficult to see, but again, by her shoulder, those three lotuses are blossoming. So although there are different interpretations of the symbolism of that, basically it's saying that everybody has that, with some of us are buds, some of us are half open, some of us are fully open, but there is that sense of the potential for growth. And she holds that with her left hand, and her left hand is in the gesture of teaching, and her right hand is in the gesture of giving, and the palms of both of their hands have eyes in them to show that both her giving and her teaching is intelligent, it's wise, it's not blind. So she represents the lotus as growth and development, this lotus stem divided into three for the stages of growth. I think I've got another White Tara here, a bit of a close-up here. And so see if you can find the three lotus blossoms there among all the other symbols there are. And you'll see in this case, she's actually got one set blossoming by each shoulder. This here, I think, is the Tibetans' idea of what a lotus seed pod looks like. So they're thinking, well, let's take this image a bit further, not just talk about the bud gradually opening, but what does the flower turn into? It produces a fruit. And I believe that the lotus fruit is edible. And in fact, lots of bits of the lotus are edible. In China, in East Asia, and in India, the roots are a favourite, aren't they? If you go to a Chinese restaurant, you can have lotus roots, can't you? And if you're lucky, you might have lotus seeds as well. So White Tara is particularly special to Tibet. And the Indian teacher Atisha, who lived over 1,000 years ago, he went to Tibet and he encouraged the practice of White Tara, visualizing White Tara as a way of meditating. And he may have even come up with that visualization himself. It looks like he may have invented it. And as an aside, well, Tibet, as you probably know, is not a warm tropical country, and there aren't any lotuses in Tibet. And so the Tibetan artists, what could they do? There wasn't a time when you could get some frozen and shipped in those days. They would never have seen a lotus. So what they did instead is that they made use of this flower, the tree peony. So when you look at Tibetan tankas, that is Tibetan paintings, what you'll often see is the Buddha is not sitting, particularly the lotuses, the flowers that are being held by White Tara and other figures, they're not actually lotuses, they're tree peonies. But you can understand why they chose that particular flower. And maybe we should think of that, And I suppose in England, in Britain, the obvious one to choose would be the rose. But it doesn't have quite the same symbolism because it doesn't grow from the mud through the water and emerge from the water. So we could stick with lotuses. Or water lilies, yeah. Yeah, water lilies, yeah. Did you say sunflowers? Yeah, they're nice, aren't they? Yeah, yeah, good. Here's part of an essay that I mentioned Sangharakshita, who founded Triratna. When he was only 25 and had just been ordained as a Buddhist monk, he wrote an essay, which I'm going to quote some of. And this is trying to evoke that image, that symbolism of the lotus, representing personal development. Deep in the mud and the slime of the riverbed lodges the lotus seed. In the cold, green darkness of that netherworld of waters, it dwells unseen and unsuspected, while the abysmal silence broods, mother-like above and all around, holding it tenderly in the soft darkness of her womb. Then one day, a shaft of light comes plunging down through the watery gloom like a sword of emerald fire, and the twilight world glows a pale and delicate green, and then a misty amber, and at last a clear, bright, translucent gold. And the seed, the lotus seed, down there in the dark bed of earth, feels the light and the warmth of the inflowing life and struggles to respond. And slowly, slowly come forth the thin white filaments, which are the roots, which is what first emerges. The pale green stem, and then the tiny, tender leaves. And at last, just as the plant thrusts itself up from the green world into the warm, sunlit world, it comes forth a little bud. But as the heat of the sun waxes stronger, the bud swells and slowly unfolds until its pure white petals and golden heart are wide open. Now let's see if this works as an animation. I tried to find one that showed the whole growth right from the seed, and there are animations on YouTube that you can watch. Somebody who's planted a lotus seed and who's made it grow. I'll just show that one again if I can. But it's a beautiful thing to watch, isn't it? The opening of the flower there. Yeah. I'll just continue with the quote before we go on to this. By means of such a simile as this, have the Buddhist teachers of old endeavoured to illustrate the gradual awakening of wisdom and compassion within the human heart. They emphasize that the seed of it is there all the time, however deeply and darkly it may be hidden away beneath layer upon layer of greed, hatred, and delusion. The Buddha nature is mirrored in the depths not only of every human heart, but also in every grain of dust and every blade of grass that there is. The slumbering seed is stirred into wakefulness by the light and warmth of that emerging wisdom and compassion, that bright effluence of the essence of reality and voidness, which is personified as the Bodhisattva or the universal eternal Buddha. So that's from an essay called The Awakening of the Heart, written by the young Bodhisattva. So the lotus becomes a sort of a conduit, a channel connecting the earthy mud with the water, and then connecting the water with the air, and the air of the sky above, and with the glinting sunlight adding the fourth element. So you can see the lotus has got all four of the traditional elements: earth, water, air, and fire. So this is the lesson, this is what we need to do. So with that image, does it hint at how we develop? Now, do you even relate to that idea of growth, of personal growth? You know, we know that children grow, that is very obvious, isn't it? But once you've reached adulthood, does the growth continue? Would you even want the growth to continue? Do you relate to that idea of being a growing individual? I do, personally, and I like that sense that even when you reach an advanced age like me, there is still more growth to do. So first of all, let's look after the seed of our potential. And these are some of the things that seed needs. It needs soil. So the soil means favourable circumstances. It's very hard to grow spiritually if you're struggling to find accommodation, you're struggling to find food, or if you're in fear of prejudice or in fear of state oppression. So you need favourable circumstances in order to grow. You also need warmth. And here particularly it's companionship, it seems to me. It's connection with people, with other people who care about you, and also maybe share your sense of the value of growing. You need light, the light of intellectual clarity, actually looking at what is my next step. To decide what your next step is, you do need to look at things clearly. And you need rain. And traditionally the Dharma, again the Lotus Sutra talks about this, the rain of the Dharma that nourishes everybody. That's the idea, the Dharma being the Buddhist teachings. And then once the conditions are there, well, what are the stages of the path? Where do you go? And the Buddha emphasized that human growth, like the lotus, is organic. It's an organic process. So you can't grab a lotus bud, tear open the carpels to produce a beautiful lotus flower. You've got to let it do it at its own rate, at its own pace. You've got to let it do it gradually. And it's said that if you can work thoroughly on one aspect of spiritual life, then the next one will emerge naturally from it. So another quote from Sangharakshita: just as out of the bud grows the flower, and out of the flower the fruit, so out of our spiritual experience there grows another experience, and out of that yet another. Each one higher, more refined, more beautiful, a little nearer to nirvana. Each stage is a spiritual experience in the process of transition to another, more advanced experience. The stages aren't fixed or static. You don't proceed up the spiral path as if you were going up the stairs of a spiral staircase. The path itself grows just as the plant grows, one stage passing over into the next, so that there's a constant upward movement. So that's the image of the growing lotus. And again, it seems to me that is the most important lesson to take from looking at the symbolism of the lotus. So what you need to do is, first of all, burst open your seed case, touched by the sun, by water, by oxygen, which means just becoming aware of a more open dimension. And then you start to reach up towards freedom. The Buddha said that the Dharma always tastes of freedom. Firstly, by living a beneficial life, and a healthy life to yourself, which is Shila, the first stage of the path, and also exposing yourself to expanding influences. For example, we'll be looking particularly at meditation as representing the methods of growing and developing as an individual, but there are other methods as well, indirect methods: art, friendship, physical culture, mindful physical culture as well, and all sorts of things. And then you need to start creating open mental states, and this is the meditation level. And in the next two talks, over the next 2 months, we're going to look at a bit more detail about how meditation works to transform the mind. And this is the direct method. And those of you who've got some understanding of Buddhism will remember that the description of deep absorption states in meditation includes the description of the third absorption, the third dhyana, which is described as lotuses thoroughly immersed in the water all around, so that you're completely immersed in the mindfulness of your state of mind. And then you break the surface. So that you could say the meditation is the movement up through the water, like in that third dhyana image. But then finally you break the surface, and that is insight. That's when you see things as they really are. And I did find this, don't worry, I won't go into details with all this, but there's a Tibetan group called Dharma Sun, and they've based their sort of program of teachings on Tara's, you'll see the green hand, shows its green Tara, on Tara's lotuses, showing how we have all these different stages that we can work through. You'll see some you might recognize there, like the Four Noble Truths, the bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment, and so on. So even when the bud emerges from the water, the petals still need to open. So we've got a long process to go there, you know. And in the meditation we were doing earlier, we started to develop that image, I hope, of what it feels like to be a growing plant. or as if we were a growing plant. I don't know how well that worked for you.
It's just
Yeah, so there is that sense that what do we need to do in every meditation session is first of all to be really earthed, get those roots going into the mud, into the slime, into the reality of our life, and not just to be drifting off into some fantasy state, but say, okay, let's be real, let's be grounded. And then you can have that sense of energy moving in the body so that you're really physical in your meditation. And that output of moving energy seems to represent also an opening process as well, like the tradition of the chakras in Indian religion, where each chakra is a lotus blossom that gradually opens until finally the 1,000-petal lotus opens above the head, and that would represent the final stage. Now we've encountered the image of a future Buddha enclosed in the lotus bud, in Sukhavati, emerging as the bud opens. But let's go a bit smaller than a Buddha, something priceless and highly condensed. And this is the jewel in the lotus, the jewel enclosed in the lotus. Now, the usual Sanskrit word for the lotus, the general one, is Padma. Has anybody come across that word in Buddhist chanting? Can you relate to that? It turns up in a particular mantra, which is the compassion mantra, the mantra of this bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, and that mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum. So Padme is just a grammatical form of Padma for a lotus, and Mani means the jewel. So you'll see that Avalokiteshvara holds in his hands a gem, a jewel, holding the jewel of the bodhicitta. So it's as if his hands form a sort of a lotus bud with the jewel hidden inside it. So it's a very important symbol in Buddhism. And you can just imagine those hands gradually opening to reveal that jewel. The jewel is the bodhicitta, which means the mind of awakening, the heart set on awakening, but out of the compassionate motivation for the sake of all beings. And you'll quite often see the mantra. This is in Tibetan characters, written on the petals of a lotus. So the top is, if I use my shadow here, that's Om Mani Padme Hum, with another, I won't go into the syllable in the middle, but Om Mani Padme Hum, the 6-syllable mantra. It's known as the most popular mantra in Tibetan Buddhism. But now let's go, instead of smaller than a Buddha, let's go bigger than a Buddha, to a whole mandala. I like this one. This is in the British Museum. Normally you'll see a mandala, Tibetan mandala, as a painting, but this is a 3-dimensional one, and it shows quite clearly the 3 rings of protection around the mandala. So we've got the ring of flames on the outside, then the ring of vajras, of diamond thunderbolts, and then these are intended to be lotus petals in green, in yellow, in red, and in blue. So it's one of the 3 rings that protects the mandala, and they represent the refreshing process of leaving behind damaging, unskillful actions. Okay, we're approaching the end, and I just want to remind you of what the lotus symbolizes in Buddhism, and broadly there are 2 main things. There's transcendence and there's growth. Now, I put above the shrine on the wall there, and here's another version of it, what's called the refuge tree. So all the different Buddhist schools in Vajrayana Buddhism have a refuge tree. This is the one for our particular school. But what I wanted to just point out was, once again, we've got that sense of all these transcendental figures, all these enlightened figures, or nearly enlightened, or approaching enlightenment, or teaching enlightenment, they're all sitting on lotuses. And the tree, the refuge tree, has 4 branches. It has a central lotus on which the Buddha sits, and then around it 4 other lotuses. There's one here with the Dharma on it, all the books of the Dharma. There's one here with the Bodhisattvas on it, the Mahayana figures. There's one here with the Buddha's personal disciples on it, and then there's one here with teachers of the recent past, the lineage of teachers of the recent past. And that's the way a refuge tree is normally arranged. A rather extravagantly elaborate image of the lotus transcending the ordinary world. But I think, as I said, that the lotus as an emblem of growth is more important than as transcendence. And maybe all those stages of growth are within us right now. We are a hard little seed just sprouting deep in the mud. We're a white and a green shoot reaching through the water. We're spreading our leaves on the surface of the water, and also maybe our buds are starting to emerge, maybe slowly opening. And this is to do with sorting out the way we live our lives, making sure we're looking after ourselves properly, but also being of benefit to others and giving up all the ways that we harm or hurt other people. And we're working directly on our minds through meditation, our reactions, our emotions, finding states of clarity and happiness. But we're also looking at our attitudes, our assumptions about life. We're seeing whether we can bring insight and illumination to them. So those are the three broad stages of the Buddhist path. Ethics, the way you live your life, meditation, working directly on the mind, and wisdom, cultivating a new vision of the way things are going on. Now the theme for this year, as I mentioned at the beginning, was inspired by a particular poem by Sangharakshita. I found an image of it. There's a statue of him. He died some years ago. And the first few lines of that, and don't worry if you can't read it on there, I'm just going to read out the first few lines. It's what we're looking at this month. I come to you with 4 gifts. The first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? So what happens when we're presented with a lotus flower? Do we understand? And when you come along to a Buddhist centre like this, do you understand what it's offering, what it is for? And I don't think that most people could be expected to understand what it's intended for quite a while. Their reasons for coming are very good reasons: to learn meditation, dealing with stress, or to experience altered states of consciousness, maybe to satisfy curiosity about Buddhism and learn about it, or maybe as a place to meet interesting and friendly people. And we should be supporting and encouraging and responding to those motivations for coming here. But really, what the Buddhist Centre is for is one thing, which is to support spiritual growth and development, the evolution of one's mind and consciousness, and also the creation of real Sangha, of real community of committed practitioners. So this means the first gift of a Buddhist centre is as an environment where lotus plants, in other words us, can thrive and grow and can open in the sunlight. So what does this lotus signify? The poem asks, do you understand? Maybe don't take too much notice of all these symbolical explanations I've been giving in the talk and go back to your personal experience. You know, I've been saying, oh, it's transcendence, it's personal growth and so on. But can we just let the flower speak for itself? You okay there? So being influenced by the symbol rather than understanding it intellectually. It's an evocative symbol, the flower. How does the lotus work as a symbol? Can you relate to it? Does it tell you something without putting it into words? So there is this suggestion of what a symbol really is. It's not really a sign, it's not really a concept. It doesn't stand for something that can be known in some other way. You get at the meaning of a symbol through the symbol itself. You can never exhaust that meaning. If you have one of those really big significant dreams, you can try and explain it, you can try and work out what things represent, but in a way it has its own message. You just need to be aware of the dream. And as a symbol, the lotus is illuminated by a higher dimension of reality. It's illuminated by emptiness, by shunyata, the mystery of the true nature of things. The lotus symbol doesn't stand for shunyata. It is shunyata appearing under certain conditions, in a certain mode. enabling you to experience shunyata through rupa, or form. So those of you who heard the Heart Sutra will have heard emptiness is form, shunyata is form is emptiness, form is shunyata. Relating the actual concrete reality of things as we experience them with that open dimension of being. And I got that idea, that little teaching from a lecture series called Creative Symbolism of Tantric Buddhism, the introduction to it. Now, according to legend, this experience of looking deeply at a lotus to see what it really signifies is how Zen Buddhism started, the story of the origin of Zen Buddhism. And here's the guy that started it. Well, there's the Buddha there, but you look at the old monk on the right. That is Mahakāshyapa. And what's the Buddha doing? He's holding up a flower and just twirling it gently in his fingers. So once, the story goes, the Buddha was on Vulture's Peak, which is an actual place that you can visit in India, where a lot of the important teachings of the Buddha were given. He was surrounded by a great crowd of disciples. They all thought he was about to give another sutra, another talk, but all he did was pick up this flower and twirl it gently in his hand. And the story says only one of the disciples actually understood, and that was Kāshyapa, Mahakāshyapa. And how did he respond? He simply smiled. So that he's supposed to be smiling. I don't know if he looks like he is smiling. And the Buddha saw this, and this is what the Buddha said. This is, by the way, a Chinese legend. It doesn't go back all that long. He said, "I have the all-pervading eye of the true Dharma, the secret heart of incomparable nirvana, the true aspect of formless form. It doesn't rely on letters, and it's transmitted outside the sutras. I now hand it on to Mahakāshyapa." And Mahakāshyapa became the first patriarch of Zen Buddhism. And then Bodhidharma later took it from India to China. And from there it traveled to Korea, to Japan, to Vietnam in particular. So I thought I'd just finish with one of the Japanese Zen masters, a haiku poet, whose name was Kobayashi Issa. And a little haiku to finish with. And that's a Japanese Zen image of a lotus, a traditional one. "In a world of grief and pain, flowers bloom even then. In a world of grief and pain, flowers bloom even then."